Welcome to Conversations of Hope, a podcast that shines light into the darkness of childhood sexual abuse. I am your host, Faith Ingram of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I am Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. We are both survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and we're sharing our healing journey to raise awareness and provide hope and support to other survivors.
We know what it's like to feel all alone with our secrets, but we also know what it's like to find freedom. We are breaking the silence that allows sexual abuse to thrive and using our voices to empower and encourage those who have experienced abuse.
Our goal is to create a safe space for survivors to find hope and healing in community. Thank you for joining us.
Last week, we shared our stories, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of sharing your story and how that impacts your healing journey. So, I mentioned last week the book, The Invisible Girls, and it says in there that sharing your story is the beginning of healing. And it talks about the different ways that you can share your story. You can share it with a counselor, with friends, by journaling, writing, through art, and through music. Those are just a few ways that you can share your story. Michelle, why don't you talk a little bit about how you came to share your story and how it impacted your healing journey?
Yes. So for me, it was where everything was just bubbling up and I needed to get it out. But it didn't come out in full sentences. Initially, it came out with just words. And so I started writing, and I would write down words like certain shaving creams, certain smells, things or places, events. So there were just words that I would put on the page. To me, it felt like seeing that word said everything, but it really said nothing. It's just that there was more to that word in my mind and in my experience than just having that word on the page. But that's how I started. When I went to counseling, I brought up a few things, and then we would go a little bit deeper on like that word and what does that word mean to you? And now let's put sentences to it. And one of the things that I found out really helped me was music. And when I would be in the car with my husband, he would have the radio playing, and I didn't want to hear that music because it was music that would take me back to the time when I was being abused. And so I wanted to listen to new songs. I didn't want to listen to old songs. And we would always fight over the radio because he was like, I was listening to that, but he didn't understand why it was painful for me to listen to that. So that's one way music, like, if I heard a song, it could take me back. I could remember things. And of course, I didn't want to remember things, so I didn't want to hear that music. But when I started listening to that music again, things started coming up even more. And then the other thing that was helpful in counseling is when I was a child, I didn't journal that much because I was afraid of someone finding my diary or finding my journal. And I knew better than to do that. But I did take old notebooks and write out lyrics of songs. And so those notebooks actually held my secrets. And the lyrics of some of those songs really resonated with my story. But if you open that notebook, it was just a journal of lyrics. It wasn't personal information, but it really, really was personal information.
Right.
So one of the things that I did in counseling is I went back and pulled some of those songs, cut the lyrics out, and I made a little album, like a smash book album, where you could turn the page and it's telling a story, but you're really just looking at song lyrics. But it's lyrics that resonated with some of my pain and resonated with some of what I'd been through. One other thing that was really helpful, especially in the beginning, was using colored pencils to write. It did something to connect the child in me. And so I would write with colored pencils, even if I were writing sentences, or I would draw things. So art's very powerful for helping to get out your story, whether it's painting or coloring or using colored pencils. But definitely writing, using your hand to write. Typing does it, but not the way writing. I think writing definitely connects more. And you will find more on the page if you write. And I think that using the colored pencils took it another step for me. I think that was a good thing. But each week when I would go to counseling, I would have these words or these song lyrics, and I would have something to bring to that conversation. And then she was great at helping me sit with it and, talk about it and go a little bit deeper with it. So it didn't come out easy, though. I think people think like the first time you share your story, it's going to be like, okay, so here's what happened. And that's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's really hard to talk about. It's really hard to say anything.
It is, because you really struggle with how are people going to respond to you if they know this about you. And it is painful a lot of times to just share. And
Right.
I know when I first shared, I didn't go into any detail at all. I just said that I had been abused during my childhood, and that's basically all I said. I didn't go into any details, but I think later on I was in several support group type meetings where confidentiality was a big thing, that nothing that was said in those group sessions was to be taken out of there. You don't share other people, whatever is said in that room stays in that room. Of course, you can share your own story with whomever you want, but you can't share anybody else's story with anybody. I wouldn't share anything that was said in there with my family members or my friends. Everything has to be confidential. And I think finding a group that you're comfortable with, that you know that they are there for you and they're going to protect your confidentiality and you feel safe and supported, that makes it easier to tell your story. And
Right.
just being believed. Sometimes you have to start small, like journaling or drawing and getting your story out from you personally before you go to other people. Just because for me, it was hard to go to other people because I was so private. I kept everything to myself.
Yes, me too. And I had so many walls built up that even the people that I'd known for a long time or were really good friends, they had no idea about this part of my life. They had no idea that I was hiding all of this baggage and all of these secrets and all of this pain. And I just carried it around with me. And ironically, those were not necessarily the people that I shared with originally. God sent people into my life who could relate to my story, who could be someone who could sit with me and who could believe me and encourage me. And, once I started going to counseling, that helped a lot. And I would decide if God needed me to share my story, then he would direct me to do that. And so if someone invited me to lunch randomly, I would go to lunch and I'm prepared. I don't want to. This isn't what I like to talk about. But God, if you need me to say something, I'll say something. And so there were a few times where I would say something and then we would have a conversation. And as hard as it is to tell your story, it gets easier. And then every time you tell it, it's like healing and more healing and more healing. And it doesn't mean that you have to share all of the details. I think that's probably, the hardest part is really getting into the details. But just having someone sit with you and knowing what you've been through, and they still love you and they believe you and they encourage you, that is what you need. That's what it takes. Because my mind was telling me, no one's going to believe you. No one's going to like you if they find out. And you're going to destroy everything. And so that kept me quiet for so long. And how do you turn that on when it's been turned off?
Right. Right.
You know?
Because we are conditioned to believe so many lies, or I don't know if we're conditioned, but we believe so many lies. And as long as we behave like we're believing those lies, then we can't prove that they aren't true. So as long as we stay quiet and we believe that we need to stay quiet because nobody will believe us or nobody will like us, or um they're going to think I'm terrible, then we live that out. And instead of when we share, then we give the opportunity for people to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I believe you and I love you and I'll walk through this with you." And I think that's the thing that we need the most, is to be validated. And we need to
Mhm.
validate others. And when somebody shares their story with us, we need to make sure that we're the safe person we need to be in holding what they've entrusted to us. You know,
Yes.
we're not gonna betray that trust to other people. We're gonna say, "Oh, I'm glad you shared that with me. How can I help? What do you need from me?" That type of thing that helps them know that we've heard them, that we're there for them, and that God's there for them. And I'm not saying that everyone that shares their story, like, I know for me, sometimes I struggle with who God is and does he really care, because he allowed this abuse to happen, with especially when the abuser is somebody that's in church leadership. And you know that God could strike them dead. And you know God could have intervened, but God gives man freedom of choice. And he
Mhm.
doesn't intervene when we make sinful choices, when we abuse others. He doesn't intervene, even though he could. So he lets us endure the consequences of our own choices and of choices that other people make. So it's sometimes it's a struggle to know who God was and who he is, and does he care about me, or
Right.
am I expendable?
Yes. I remember one of the most pivotal points probably in my healing journey was when I was in counseling and I was sharing one of the hardest parts of my story, the hardest part of my story. And it was details, and it was sending me back, and it was hard. And she asked me, "Where's God in the room?" And I was completely, I mean, everything, like all the emotions that you can imagine shot through me at one time, like shocked, angry, scared. Like, what do you mean God was in the room? Wait, was God in the room? And she let me go through some of those emotions. And then she said, find him in the room. And it was finding God in my story. And one of the things that we can talk about this more in another podcast, but what that looks like for me in that moment was, in everything that I was going through, as awful as it was, as painful as it was, God had ways for me to endure, right? Like dissociating, out of body experiences, like things that got me through that, I did not necessarily experience the full blow because there were coping mechanisms in place. And so there was some comfort there. The other part of having him there, realizing he was with me, is that I had a witness, because most of abuse will always happen behind closed doors. It will always be silent. No one will ever see it or find out. You're going to have a hard time proving it, etc. You may you may have somebody that witnesses it, but more often than not, it's hidden. And so there was a day towards the end of my counseling when I realized that song, His Eyes on the Sparrow, and I Know He Watches Me, that was a big song throughout my journey. And towards the end, I was listening to that song one day and just realized, wait, God is my witness. I know I'm telling the truth. And if no one in the entire world believes me, God was there.
Right.
He is my witness. And that gave me confidence. It gave me peace, and it gave me hope, and it gave me courage, because I do have a witness.
Right.
I do have a witness.
Right.
And that was a big piece. But I went through all of the, where were you? Why didn't you stop it? Why me?
Mm-hmm.
Why me? I must have said that a dozen times. Why does it have to be me? Why me?
Yep. And I know in Malachi, I believe chapter 4, it talks about it's talking in that passage about when will God actually judge the wicked, because it seems like they are getting away with everything that they're doing, and there are no consequences. And in chapter 4, it said the faithful talked among themselves, and God heard them, and a book of remembrance was written for them. And that to me, it says that God hears us when we're not praying. That was talking about the faithful were talking among themselves about the fact that people seem to be getting away with evil, and
Okay.
where's God? And then God says he wrote a book of remembrance. So that to me says he cares enough to write down and remember the things that we've gone through. So that to me says God does care, and he is interested,
Yes.
and he does know. And at some point, it will be judged. It will be taken care of when the time comes. But it's it's just that waiting, but it's just knowing that God does care, and eventually everything will be made right. And how did you find people, Michelle, to share your story with? Because I know a lot of times you don't want to share with your family members because they know too much of your life and they're too intertwined. So how did you find people to share with?
The few people that I shared with in the beginning were completely new to me. God set it up, and one day it came out, and that's how it worked. They weren't people that were like in my life prior to that. And like I said, if you have people that are, close friends that maybe know nothing about you, they don't know any of this story. So I didn't feel comfortable just bringing it up to them. In fact, when I did go back and say stuff to my friends, that was really hard because I felt like I had betrayed them, or, I lied because I wasn't telling them this part of my life. But they understood, of course, why I had kept the secrets and stuff. But for me, it was mostly strangers, mostly new people that became friends for a season, or, they were a part of my life at that time. I also participated in group therapy, and I think that's where I had major breakthrough, because I think there's something about sitting in a room with a circle of people who get you, who understand shame and understand your story. And maybe theirs is different, but the pain is the same, and the struggles are the same. And so being in a room where you know you're not alone, and there's safety, and there's people that are going to keep everything that you say confidential, it gives you the freedom to say what you need to say. And I think that's really, really helpful, very important.
Right. Right. And I know we mentioned when we do conferences, sometimes we've had survivors bring their artwork, and we give them an opportunity to share what they were trying to communicate through their art. And it's very, very powerful way
Mhm.
that God used their artwork in their healing process and in their healing journey. And, it doesn't, you don't have to be a professional artist to use art to get your story out, to use art to express your feelings. And I know art and music, sometimes people have musical ability and they actually perform or produce music in helping in their healing journey. But like you said before, just listening to music that impacts you and that helps in the healing process as well. I do think that music is very, very powerful.
Yes, it is. And one of the things I wanted to go back to when we were talking about God, I think one of the things that I discovered in my journey is that God was very compassionate. He didn't make me, it's not like we sat there and had to go through every single memory and watch a movie and press rewind and press play again and watch it again. We only hit certain spots, only certain memories came up, whatever we needed to work through, that's what we worked through. And like today, does stuff still come up? Yes. But the big stuff, I think my counselor called it a hot memory or something like that, like where it's a really deeply big memory. But those we worked through. But it's not like I had to sit there and go through remembering every single thing that ever happened. It was bits and pieces. And again, it started with words, then it started with sentences, and then art, and then music. Colors were huge to me. So, like, colors meant everything to me. Pink became the display of God's love. Red was, I saw red when I thought about those really bad memories. Green reminded me of shame and how I felt like I was carrying this awful color of green and everyone could see it. So art is a very, very powerful way to process
Mhm.
how you feel, process your story, process your emotions. So again, if it's just colored pencils and a pen or some paints or crayons, you'll be amazed at what comes out on the paper
Right.
as you're trying to process your story.
Right. Yeah. And it is important that that you don't have to remember everything and relive everything. It's just getting those feelings out so that you can process them. And I know some survivors have said to me, "What if I don't remember everything?" And I said, "Just pray and ask God to show you what you need to remember, and you don't have to remember everything. You know
Right.
that you were abused and you know what you went through. You don't have to remember all of the details because I think God allows us to suppress those
Yes.
because it would be too hard to process some of our memories. So it's not important that we remember everything. I think if you're struggling with that, you should just ask God, show me what I need to remember and keep the other stuff I don't need to know. Let them go. And
Right.
it's important to give yourself permission that you don't have to remember everything in order to validate your story. Because,
Right.
like you said, we disassociate, we have these survival skills that we actually go someplace else so that we don't experience to the degree the abuse that we're enduring. So we aren't going to remember because we're using our survival skills to suppress those memories to have something different for our mind to focus on than what we were going through at the time. Because a person that experiences an accident, they may never ever remember exactly what happened in that accident, but they know they were in an accident and they
Right.
received these injuries from the accident. Their car was, totaled. They know they were in an accident, but they may not remember the details of that accident.
And I think that's something that's really important to bring up just about trauma in general, because there have been studies, like even the person with the accident, that they may not remember what happened, but what they remember are like the sound of the brakes. They may remember the smell of gasoline. So it's their senses. And that's how powerful our body is. Your body remembers. Even if your brain chooses
Right.
to cut it off because it's too much information,
Mhm.
your senses are picking up things. And so a lot of times when someone may be disclosing for the first time or saying, this happened to me, it may come out in little fragments like that. It may not come out in full sentences, or this is what happened and this is how it happened. It may be, I remember the smell of this particular shaving cream.
Mhm.
Like that's how mine started out. It was the shaving cream, it was the deodorant, it was the senses that was bringing back the memories. And so, but that's true even in a traumatic car accident, like you mentioned. Like they may not remember, but they may say, like when you ask what happened, those are the things that they say. And so we can't expect any different when we're dealing with someone who's endured sexual trauma or sexual abuse. They may not be able to tell you A to Z, here's everything that happened. You have to be patient and let it come out as it comes out. Because we're the ones holding the story, right? We've had the box, we've sealed it, we've sat on it, we've pushed it down under the ground as far as it can go. And we are the ones that have to dig it up and open it and let it out. And that's going to take time. That's going to take patience. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's really hard, but it's so worth it. It is so worth it to get that out of your system and to have that freedom and to know that all of those lies that are in your head are lies.
Yes.
And the truth is, you are believed, you are loved,
Right.
and you have support.
Right.
That's really important.
Yeah. So just start telling your story in whatever way works best for you. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. And just trust God to be there with you through the process. We hope this podcast is a source of comfort and inspiration for those who are struggling with the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and healing.
Please be sure to subscribe and check out our show notes for more information. See you next time on Conversations of Hope with Faith and Michelle.